why don't we open free trade with Africa? Why do we have embargoes and tariffs on goods from countries all over the world? If we trade freely with every country in the world, we benefit because poor people in our country can get cheaper goods from abroad, and the poor people in those countries can get our money to develop and become richer, and then there will be less of an impulse for them to emigrate to richer countries. What's more, we should be a bastion of free markets and show how prosperous free markets can make a country, so that we set an example on the world stage of what is possible when countries adopt free markets, so that they want to emulate our political philosophy. And what I'm saying is, you cannot only fight a battle on one front. You have to fight the battle on every front: the level of economics, the level of foreign policy, and so forth.
Well, my feeling on the free market side, I definitely prefer a free market to a market in which, you know, there are lots of restrictions and interference and regulations and subsidies and so on. The issue that I have, if you look at the United States, is that we currently are essentially, we have much more outgoing wealth than we have coming in regards to trade. Our trade deficit was approaching $1 trillion last year alone.
Right. Okay.
And one of the problems that we have is that we've tried this experiment now for 50 or 60, 70 years, since World War II. We have very few trade tariffs and restrictions on exports and imports. And I will say that the problem that we're running into is that nobody else seems to be doing the same thing. They all seem to be erecting tariffs and boundaries around the industries that they want to protect of their own. And in particular, we've had a major problem with third world nations doing it. They're probably worse than anybody if you look at China and their trade policies over the last 50 years, and if you look at Mexico and some of the other African nations that do have exports. So the issue that I have here,
I think the issue that you have is, well, if other countries are
hold on, Anthony, because I'm not finished yet. The issue that I have here is that it's not enough to be an example if after 50 or 60 or 70 years nobody will follow your example. So at some point we have to say, look, we're going to have to do to you what you're doing to us until you're ready to lower your tariffs, because we've already put the best foot forward. We've already lowered our tariffs, and you haven't responded in like. So as a result, we now must move to protect ourselves in the same manner you are. When you're ready to trade fair, we'll trade fair with you. And I think that's where the United States has come to at this point. And I think that it's a fair position, because we have put our best foot forward for, like I said, more than half a century now with the rest of the world. So, you know, and now as far as immigration and refugees go, the biggest issue here is that the country inside the United States domestically, we have a huge lobby on the behalf of business. They want those immigrants to come. Some of it, a small portion of it, is cheap labor for agricultural industries and a few other industries. However, the vast majority of it, the issue is that these businesses, retail outlets, movie theaters, hotels, restaurants, real estate industry, they want these people to come, and they want them to get on welfare, because they don't care where the money comes from. If the money comes from the government, and then these migrants take that government money, which comes from taxpayers, and they spend it, that's great. They're happy because they're still getting money. It does mean more money for them. However, the taxpayers, that money that's being taxed off of them instead of going into savings, gets handed to these so-called refugees and migrants, and then it gets spent on these businesses. So what we've got here is we have a group of people in the business community who are lobbying for migrants to come in, and they're lobbying for them to have access to welfare. They want that welfare because they know that it means more money in their pockets, and they don't care if it's coming out of the average person's pocket. And so that's the reason why the welfare problem is not going to go away. So we have to shut the borders first so that we can cut off that flow.
No, I agree with you on that point. I have to dispute your analysis of tariffs. I completely agree with your analysis ideologically in the sense that this is why America continues to have tariffs and not permit trade from third world countries because of the trade deficit. What I dispute is that a trade deficit is a bad thing. When you increase on a personal level, when you increase your wealth, it's not by selling more stuff, it's by getting more stuff. If you want a keyboard in your house, you go out and buy a keyboard. That's what makes you wealthy. You now have a keyboard. If you want a bigger bed, you buy a bigger bed. So getting cheap goods from abroad is not harmful. If you're a lawnmower,
it is if you're having to borrow money. But it is if you're having to borrow money and print money to do it.
Allow me to make my case, please, because I listened to your case, and this is not something that can be made in 60 seconds, right? See if you're a lawnmower maker, like I'm just pulling something out of my ass, right? And your neighbor comes into your garden and leaves the lawnmower there and says, I don't need this anymore. I'm just going to leave it here. Okay, that means you might need to stop making lawnmowers and make something else because you got one already. But you still got a free-ass lawnmower. So if some idiot abroad wants to subsidize their lawnmower-making industry, that does not actually make us less wealthy. This is an economic fallacy that is widely believed, but was debunked by Frederick Bastiat, by David Ricardo, even earlier than Bastiat. The idea that us getting cheap imports from abroad hurts us because we've got a big trade deficit is completely fallacious. And the reason why is, sure, people are selling us stuff, and say I'm an American like you, we're paying for them with American dollars, but here's the clincher. American dollars can only be spent on American goods. So sometime or another, it's going to get to the point where those countries are buying. Now, you don't, on the micro level, if we're importing cars from Japan, and our car manufacturing goes out of business, that sucks for people working in the car manufacturing industry. But for the vast majority of the people in the country who are getting cheaper cars, that represents a real increase in their standard of living. Plus, if they're getting a car for a few $100 cheaper, they've got a few $100 extra to spend on other goods, some of which will be domestically produced goods. So even if you're not playing on an even playing field and other people are banning the importation of your goods, let them do it because essentially if you play the same game as they're playing, you will inevitably be struck by your own sword. You're saying no to cheap goods that will increase the standards of living in your country. And yeah, people might need to move industry. They might need to move into more automated industries, onto internet, business, marketing, all sorts of high tech, which they're not doing. But the fact is, in the West, our wages are too high for manufacturing to remain a major part of our economy. We should be we should be importing manufactured goods from the poorest countries in the world to help bring the poor people of the world into a higher standard of living. And as we do,
why do we have an obligation to do that? I mean, it's not that simple anyway. When you have a massive, we're bleeding wealth. And we're doing it through these trade deficits because it's not just the local domestic. It's not just the local businesses that are reaping the benefits of all that welfare money. That welfare money is buying goods imported cheaply onto our market. We're printing money and borrowing money to pay for all these goods in that massive trade deficit. This is not a situation where everybody's spending private money to buy all these cheap foreign goods. We're running a government deficit in order to pay for this stuff. Where when we have 1 out of every 5 people on food stamps in this country, when we have, and that means that they don't have to spend.
You're blaming it on the wrong thing.
I'm not.
It's not because of import.
Right where it should be.
No, because you're only looking at one side of the equation. You're only looking at the trade deficit. You're not looking at all the. You're not looking at all the cheap. You're not looking at all the cheap shit that people in your country are receiving from third world countries.
Yeah, but we're borrowing money, Anthony, to buy all that cheap shit.
Yeah, but that's the mistake.
It's not.
The mistake is the fiat currency and the printing of money. I completely agree with you on that point. The mistake is not the import.
Right, but it doesn't change.
The trade deficit is completely irrelevant.
Hold on just a second. It doesn't change. It does not change the fact that some things are easier to fix a certain way than another way. For instance, it's easier to close the borders than it is to shut off welfare in this country. Oh, that's just a fact.
But I'm not.
It's
I'm
easier.
Not, I'm not for. Okay, but this is a straw man. At no point.
But hold on,
no point did I say I was for opening the borders.
Anthony, I'm going to have to mute you for a second. It's easier to restrict trade than it is to try and get us to shut off welfare and to change the trade policies of other countries. Now,
okay. There's no, but you're laboring in the faulty assumption that restricting trade is good for America. It's not. It's bad. It means that people in America do not get access to cheap goods.
In the short
term, it's bad. In the short term, it's bad because
so we have a fundamental disagreement here because I think in the
fundamental disagreement, but all of the economic evidence is available, and the completely rational arguments set out by people like David Ricardo have not been refuted. The only thing is that it's very.
Well, okay.
I recommend that you read a book called The Myth of the Rational Voter by Brian Kaplan, where he goes through the arguments
I don't agree with Brian Kaplan on many things. There's one problem. There's one area of disconnect. I think that Brian Kaplan misses the mark in many places.
I think he misses the mark on immigration. On that point, I completely agree with you. But on free trade, the arguments in favor of free trade, even if the other side isn't saying fair, are incontrovertible. It's the fact that people in this country are getting real
I absolutely disagree with that
I know you
statement.
disagree.
And I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of a lot of reasons for that. And those arguments that you're giving,
isn't good. You've not explained why it isn't good for people in your country that are poor to get access to cheap goods from abroad.
But you see, that's because you won't allow me to.
I would like you to.
Those arguments are not great arguments because they are very two-dimensional arguments. All right, cheap goods are not always just like cheap labor is not always good. We have borders for a reason. All right, one of the reasons that we have borders is to keep out things that we do not find have a positive impact on our country. One of the issues that we have is we're doing a lot of business trade-wise with countries that have nationalized economies or are completely command and control economies, China being a perfect example. They're importing goods into our nation that are suffering from the economic calculation problem. This has a massive impact on our marketplace. It is not a good impact at all. They have an unlimited ability to continue to produce goods and sell them at a price below the cost to make them. They can do this as long as
I agree with you on that.
They're not worried.
But that's only bad for the Chinese. That's not bad for Americans.
This is what I'm talking about. You just jumped in and cut me off. You just cut me off.
No,
subsidies and tariffs, to a limited extent, cause the same problem. The issue here is not about whether the tariff itself, at that particular instance, on that particular good, is good or bad. The issue here is this is not an economic problem. This is a political issue. This is a situation where other countries are doing things to us, and they have continued to do them repeatedly for decades. And our example has not changed their behavior one bit. Their cheap goods are an immediate shot in the arm. But in the long term, they've resulted in unemployment, more inflation, and more problems for us as a whole, economically, as a society.
Well,
Using their system to import poverty to the United States. They're exporting their poverty from their nation to us by using these tactics. They've artificially their currency to the dollar.
I disagree on your fundamental point. The first thing is they do not cause inflation, because cheaper goods can only cause deflation because they're cheaper, at least price deflation. Second of all, they're not exporting poverty. They're exporting wealth, because you can buy their cheap shit for below the actual market rate. So you're getting cheap.
Not if your people aren't working,
like
and you're having to borrow money. If you're having to borrow money to purchase it, you're having to print money and borrow money, and everything you're buying is on credit. You're buying everything on credit. You're buying everything on credit.
Well, but if it was more expensive, you'd have to borrow even more money to buy it. So that's fundamentally unsound mathematically, never mind economically. If you were having to buy more expensive goods, then you'd have to borrow more money to buy them. That's more to do with a problem with the state setting interest rates in the central bank domestically than anything to do with anything another country is doing to you. Saying no to cheap goods is a self-inflicted wound. You're basically harming the working class. As for
but we're not doing. They're not really doing it to that.
That's not the case.
One of the things I want to point out. They're not doing it. We're allowing it to happen.
The only thing that causes unemployment is minimum wage and labor laws. The basic law of economics is that human wants are unlimited, whereas resources are limited. Therefore, there's always an endless demand for labor, because human wants are unlimited. The only thing that can ever cause unemployment is government restrictions on employment, including the minimum wage and all labor laws. Everyone could be employed in something. So, and even if they were employed at $2 an hour, that doesn't sound like a very high wage. But the thing is, if everyone was employed at that wage, everything would be so cheap that you could afford a chef and a butler and a gardener and all these kinds of people that you can't afford right now.
If you make the assumption that everybody's employed.
Well, no,
that everybody's making enough money.
All I'm saying is that human wants are unlimited. I would love to have someone.
But wait a minute.
I would love to have someone to tidy my house for me. But I would love to have someone to tidy my house for me. But I can't afford minimum wage for it.
Okay, but resources are not unlimited.
Yes, but human labor is hugely
manufactured goods are not unlimited. Manufactured goods are not unlimited.
No, I agree with you, but labor is hugely underutilized in the economy because of labor laws and restrictions. All of these are domestic policies. So, get your house in order. We actually need to get out and sell the argument against the minimum wage, sell the argument against labor laws.
Well, we do that
in order to cure unemployment.
I agree with you on those points.
At least we've found some common ground.
but at the same time, I don't agree with opening your borders to absolute 100% free trade with those who don't practice it themselves. It's kind of like extending the NAP to people who don't extend it back to you.
Well, okay, I disagree on that point, and I think I've made my views clear, and I'm glad that we can have a friendly dispute on that. I agree with you that under the current climate, we cannot open our borders to migrants. I think that would be absolutely suicide. It would be suicide to have an open borders policy on immigration. However, on the importation of cheap goods from abroad, I believe that any tariffs or restrictions on free trade are a self-inflicted wound, whether or not the countries that we are importing those goods from are singing from the same song sheet. I think any restrictions on free trade in any circumstances other than if we're at war, the country was supposed to be trading with. And
sure.
I guess if anyone wants to resolve that dispute, I just refer them to Frederick Bastiat and David Ricardo, who I think have thoroughly debunked the case that tit for tat on restrictions on free trade are helpful for a nation state. Besides, bringing it back to the NEP. Just one more point before I close. I just want to make one more point, and I'll give you the floor. Just on a level, if we accept the NEP, what right does the government have to say that I shouldn't be allowed to import cheaper apples from an African nation? If I want to buy a cheaper apple, that's between me and the apple seller. The government has absolutely no right to stop me from buying the cheapest apple. You know, you just don't have the right to stop me from buying a cheap product from abroad. That is a violation of my liberty.
Well, I think that what we're looking at here, at the risk of sounding a little bit combative, I think you can't have it both ways. You either support borders or you don't. Borders are there to protect us. You let in good stuff, you keep out the bad stuff. Sometimes the bad stuff is foreign goods. That's just the way it is. And those foreign goods are typically ones that have a tendency, at least in the short run, to do damage to your economy, or in the long run do damage to your economy. Now, I'm not saying that I don't prefer complete open, unrestricted trade between nations. I'm 100% with you. But the argument you just gave for the apples is the same argument that the large corporation and the agricultural business gives for these so-called unlimited refugees and migrants from foreign countries to come in and work dirt cheap. So I'm just not going to agree to that. I think that if you import goods with an economic calculation problem, you're causing damage, and you don't have a free market. And that's the real issue here. What's a free market? I don't believe that you actually have, none of this is free trade. If you're trading with people who have tariffs on your goods, then it's not free trade. Because free trade requires both sides to behave properly. And that's kind of where I am on that. And I don't think you can extend free trade to one nation if they're not extending it back to you. It's just not possible. Well, it is possible that you can adhere to the principles, but I'm saying it is possible that you can disagree with the principles. You can agree to the principles. You can leave your trading open and let everybody pour whatever they want into your country without putting tariffs on it, regardless of whether they put tariffs on your goods or not. But all you have to do is come to the United States and travel to some of our areas that were once very wealthy and very well off and very rich, and look at them.
Yeah, and what you'll see
is a situation. What you'll see in areas where they're absolutely destroyed now. And you see,
because of the minimum
communities that have been hit the hardest
because of the minimum wage and labor laws.
It's not it. It's not all. That's not the only reason.
And because of automation.
If you look at China, all right. If you look at what they're doing, they're actually selling stuff below the cost of manufacture, and they don't have the same type of environmental regulations that we have.
That is great for poor people in the United States because they're getting cheap stuff. That's absolutely
except for the ones that can't find a job. Right now, we have the lowest unemployment that we've had in 40 years.